She is a narrated fiction story created for discussion and entertainment purposes.
Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a rugged ex-land agent builds his dream home off the grid, the last thing he expects is a slick HOA trying to steal it. Armed with forged maps, corrupt officials, and a demolition order, but they picked the wrong man to bully. This land has a fight coming, and he's ready. I built this house with my own two hands. Every stone in the foundation, every bolt in the roof, every screw in the hardwood floor, I placed them myself. Not out of some romantic notion of independence, but because I know exactly how to do it right. After 15 years with the Bureau of Land Management, I don't just understand land, I speak its language. So when I bought this 1.6-acre parcel tucked away in the Red Rock Hills of western Colorado, I knew it was mine in every conceivable sense. Surveyed, staked, filed, deeded, and defended. The closest housing development was more than half a mile downhill behind a tree line and a ridge, and I liked it that way. Which is why it stopped me cold that Monday morning when I heard the crunch of tires outside and looked up from my coffee to see two people in neatly pressed polo shirts and reflective vests walking up my gravel drive with clipboards in hand. HOA logos on the breast pocket. They had the look of bureaucrats cosplaying as rangers. I opened the screen door before they even knocked. "Mr. Jeremy Holt?" the older one asked, glancing at a printed sheet. "That's me. We're here on behalf of Pine Grove Estates Homeowners Association. You've been served." He held out a thick envelope with notice of demolition stamped in red. I took it, my fingers tightening slightly. "Excuse me. You have 10 calendar days to remove all unpermitted structures on this land. If you fail to comply, the HOA reserves the right to contract removal services and charge you accordingly." I stared at him. "You're joking." The younger one spoke up. "According to the updated zoning and subdivision boundaries filed last quarter, this property now falls within Pine Grove jurisdiction. You're in violation of sections 2.4 and 5.9 of the architectural guidelines. Structure must be brought into compliance or removed." Removed. I laughed once, short and bitter. "This isn't your jurisdiction. This house was built before your HOA even existed. My permits were pulled 5 years ago. This land has never been part of Pine Grove." They exchanged a glance. "If you believe there has been a clerical error," the older man said, rehearsed, "you may file an appeal with the HOA board. But the demolition deadline remains in effect." They left as quickly as they came, leaving a trail of smugness in their wake. I stood there holding the envelope like it was radioactive. Then I went inside, opened it, and laid the papers out on the dining table. It was all there. A printed demolition demand, a page listing structural violations, and, most curiously, a map. The map claimed my house now sat squarely within the new extended boundary of Pine Grove Estates, a boundary supposedly amended and certified 2 months ago. But I knew this terrain better than the back of my hand. I pulled out my original property survey, the deed, the topographical maps, and the digital copy of the county zoning overlay. Every one of them, every official record, showed a clear separation between my land and theirs. Still, this so-called amended map had a county stamp on it, which meant one thing: someone inside the local recorder's office had signed off on it. I didn't waste time. I packed my files in a waterproof case, locked the house, and drove straight into town. The county recorder's office was a 20-minute drive down Route 36, a bland 2-story brick building with beige carpets and linoleum floors that smelled like dust and toner ink. Behind the desk sat a woman named Gwen, who'd been there longer than most people stay married. She remembered me. "Jeremy Holt, you're still up on Ridge Point." "Still there," I said, laying the HOA letter on the counter. "Have a look." She frowned as she read. We had a couple of revised parcel maps submitted by Pine Grove's planner last quarter, I think. Want me to pull the latest?" "Yes," I said. "And the one filed when I bought my land." She went to the back while I waited. A man in a wrinkled golf shirt gave me a once-over as he passed by with a folder under his arm. The room hummed with printers. 10 minutes later, Gwen returned with 2 maps. She spread them side by side, and there it was. My lot, parcel BR 102, had somehow shifted on the new version. Instead of ending at Ridge Creek, the HOA boundary now climbed the hill, my hill, and swallowed the whole damn property. My parcel number was still listed, but now it appeared boxed in by dashed HOA lines. In fine print at the bottom was a signature, F. Craig, County Subdivision Consultant. I leaned in. I knew that name, Freddie Craig, ex-BLM contractor. Last I heard, he was doing side work for private developers who didn't want to wait for federal timelines. I looked at Gwen. This shouldn't be approved. She hesitated, lowering her voice. Honestly, this map came through late. No public hearing. Just a notation on the monthly batch. Seemed rushed, but it had internal clearance. I stared at the printed stamp of approval. Who cleared it? She leaned in. That I'm not supposed to say, but it came from the Development Coordination Desk. I'd talked to Jason Epps. Jason Epps. A bureaucrat with a flexible spine and a reputation for bending rules when things were too complicated. He and Freddie had worked on the same project near Durango a few years back. It smelled like recycled corruption. I thanked Gwen, made high-res copies of both maps, and left the building. Back in my truck, I just sat there a minute. 10 days. That's what they'd given me. 10 days to erase 5 years of sweat and stone and stubborn independence. I turned the ignition and drove home. The next morning, I was up before dawn. Sleep hadn't been an option. My mind kept turning the same corner over and over. 10 days. 10 days to tear down my house because some HOA with delusions of empire had redrawn a map behind closed doors. And now I had a name, Freddie Craig, the so-called consultant whose signature had appeared at the bottom of that altered boundary map like a stamp of silent war. I started by printing every document I had. The original deed, parcel certificate, county-level zoning verification, environmental clearance, construction permits, topographic overlays, a 5-year trail of paperwork, each page a nail in the coffin of the lie they were trying to sell. I organized it all into a binder, added the new map side by side with the old one, and highlighted every shift in boundary line with a neon marker. Then I called the county office to schedule an appointment with Jason Epps, the man Gwen had whispered about. He was in meetings all morning. Of course he was. So I did what any retired government grunt with a head full of legal codes and caffeine does. I showed up in person. The Development Coordination Office was on the second floor, tucked between planning and public infrastructure. Clean desks, framed posters of suburban renderings, inspirational slogans like "Planning Tomorrow Today." I walked past the reception desk without waiting for permission. Jason Epps was mid-conversation with a woman in heels and too much perfume. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed the way a poker player's do when they draw a bad hand. "Mr. Holt," he said slowly. "Didn't know you had an appointment." "I don't," I said, stepping into the doorway. "But I do have about 50 pages of reasons why you're going to talk to me. Privately." He glanced at the woman, muttered something, and gestured me into his office. His blinds snapped shut like a trap. "What can I help you with?" "You can explain how the hell my property ended up inside an HOA that didn't exist when I broke ground." He tried the bureaucrat's favorite opening move, the passive shuffle. There was a recent correction to subdivision boundaries based on a review of early surveys. "Correction?" I snapped open the binder and slid it toward him. "That's not a correction. That's a redraft. You shifted 3 property lines, including mine, without public notice, without hearings, and without informing title holders. And it was approved under Freddie Craig's signature." Jason didn't even blink. Freddie's a licensed subdivision consultant. Freddie is a developer's pet hack who's been booted from 2 adjacent counties for manipulating boundary approvals. And he's a co-founder of Blue Mountain Properties. Guess who's listed as Pine Grove's development partner? Jason's calm veneer cracked a little. He swallowed. "That doesn't make this fraudulent." "No, but this does." I pulled out the satellite overlay. "You shifted GPS coordinates. Look at parcel BR 102. The new corner stake doesn't even match the terrain. There's no ridge on the new plot, but there is on mine. Whoever edited this didn't even bother to check the elevation profiles. Sloppy." Jason stared at the map, his jaw stiff. "If you believe a mistake was made—" "I don't believe," I interrupted. "I know, and I'm submitting a formal complaint to the Office of the State Surveyor and to the District Attorney's Office. And if you so much as shred one file before the audit hits, you're complicit. This binder's going to 3 reporters and a retired federal judge before the sun sets." His face paled. "That won't be necessary." "That's not up to you anymore." I stood, took the binder back, and left him sitting there in silence. On the way out, I passed a framed plaque on the wall. "Honest growth, transparent process. I resisted the urge to tear it down. Back home, I knew time was ticking. I installed additional trail cameras, 2 at the base of the hill, 1 watching the main entrance to my land, and 1 pointed directly at the road where that damn bulldozer had appeared the other day. The footage would be uploaded to cloud storage every 5 minutes, with duplicate backups sent to a hard drive hidden inside the barn wall. I wasn't just documenting, I was preparing a case. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Freddie Craig. So, I dug deeper. Online databases showed that Freddie had recently submitted 2 more boundary changes, both involving lands adjacent to expanding HOAs. In both cases, the affected landowners had filed appeals, but neither got traction because the new maps were quietly registered as corrections rather than amendments, skipping the mandatory hearing process. It was a loophole, and they were using it like a crowbar. What caught my eye, though, was a campaign donation record. Freddie Craig had donated $3,000 to a county commissioner's campaign, the same commissioner who chaired the Zoning Oversight Committee. That was enough to smell smoke. The next morning, I emailed a copy of everything, maps, records, timelines, screenshots, to a friend of mine, Danny Salazar, a field reporter from a regional investigative news network. We'd met during a fire mitigation project back in my BLM days. If anyone could sniff out corruption and broadcast it with teeth, it was Danny. She called me 20 minutes later. "Jeremy," she said, "what the hell have you stumbled into?" "Looks like someone's trying to make my land part of a lakeside condo brochure." "I'll be there tomorrow," she said. With a drone, 2 cameras, and a very sharp producer, I ended the call and looked out over the valley. The house I built was still standing. But I had a feeling the real demolition wasn't coming with a bulldozer. It was going to come in a courthouse. And I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night either. My body stayed still in bed, but my mind didn't. Every creak of the beams sounded like heavy equipment pulling up. I kept imagining the flash of headlights, the hiss of hydraulics, the splintering of wood. Paranoia? Maybe. But when someone threatens to tear down your home with a deadline and paperwork, it's not paranoia. It's preparation. By dawn, I was already outside, wiring a fresh solar panel to the backup battery for the camera system. The sky was turning that pink-orange color it gets just before the sun breaks over the ridge. I took my coffee out onto the porch and watched the world wake up. Birds didn't care about land disputes, but I did. Just after 8, Danny's SUV rolled up the gravel road like it had something to prove. She stepped out, jeans, hiking boots, windbreaker with her station's logo, and a backpack full of equipment. Her producer, a lanky guy named Travis with a permanently skeptical expression, followed behind holding a drone case. "You weren't kidding," Danny said, scanning the ridge. "This place is gorgeous and isolated. Looks exactly like the kind of place a greedy HOA would want to annex. That's because it is." We got right to work. While Travis launched the drone for aerial footage, Danny interviewed me, standing in front of the house, binder in one hand, map in the other. I told the story exactly as it happened. No dramatics, just facts. Her camera didn't blink. By noon, we had footage of the terrain, the original survey stakes still visible on camera, the physical landmarks proving the map was a lie. I even walked her down to the old oak tree that marked the corner of my property. Carved into the trunk was the original stake number, still visible if you knew where to look. Danny nodded. "This is good. Better than good. This is bulletproof." "You'd be surprised what people ignore when the lies come with official-looking stamps," I said. That afternoon, I drafted a cease and desist letter. It was addressed to the Pine Grove HOA, specifically to the president, Mallory Phelps. In the body of the letter, I cited the Colorado Revised Statutes on property rights, trespassing, fraudulent land claims, and unlawful entry. Attached were copies of my survey, the original deed, and a scanned affidavit from the land's previous owner, who I called the night before to confirm he had never signed or consented to any HOA inclusion before selling to me. I hand-delivered the letter, not by mail, not by lawyer, personally. Pine Grove Estates sat at the bottom of the ridge, a cookie-cutter collection of fake stone facades, vinyl fences, and 2 green lawns. I pulled into their Welcome Center parking lot, binder in hand, and walked straight through the glass doors. The receptionist looked up with the artificial politeness of someone who's been told to smile at everyone until they go away. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yeah, Jeremy Holt. I'm here to deliver a cease and desist to your president." "Is Mallory Phelps in?" Her smile flickered. "She's currently in a board meeting. I can take." "No," I said, setting the envelope firmly on the counter. "You'll hand this to her today, and let her know that as of this moment, any unauthorized access to my land will be considered criminal trespass, and legal proceedings have been initiated." I left before she could respond. Back home, I checked the cameras, and that's when I saw them. 3 men in reflective vests standing just outside the tree line at the bottom of the ridge. They weren't on the gravel path, but they were close. Too close. One held a clipboard, the other had something that looked suspiciously like a rangefinder. The third paced around with a walkie-talkie. I zoomed the footage. Their vests had HOA logos. They didn't knock, they didn't call. They just stood there for about 10 minutes, pointing and muttering, then disappeared back into the brush. I saved the footage, tagged the timestamp, and forwarded it to Danny with a note. "They're sniffing around already." 6 hours later, it happened. A deep rumble. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to see a flatbed truck climbing the bottom of the ridge, hauling a yellow bulldozer, followed by a second truck with a small excavator. I grabbed my phone and my binder, then took the long path down toward the entry point. The machines came to a stop at the edge of my property. 4 men in hard hats stood around a tablet, arguing over something. I didn't waste time. "Stop right there," I yelled as I approached. They looked up surprised, like I'd walked in on a poker game. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, we're contractors working on behalf of Pine Grove Estates. We've been authorized to begin site prep for structure removal." "Not on my land, you're not," I said, holding up a copy of the temporary restraining order I'd filed that morning through the emergency docket, thanks to a sympathetic county judge who knew how this game worked. "According to this," I said, pointing to the court seal, "any incursion onto parcel BR102 is a violation of this court order, and I have every square inch of this property under camera surveillance. You step 1 inch onto my soil, I'll have you in front of a judge by sundown." They hesitated. One guy pulled out his phone to take a picture of the document. "You've been warned," I added. "This footage is being live-streamed to 3 locations, including the sheriff's office." That did it. They climbed back into the trucks and backed down the ridge, engines groaning with retreat. But they didn't go far. They stopped just beyond the edge of my fence line, idling like wolves waiting for nightfall. They weren't done. Not even close. That evening, I added 2 more floodlights. I didn't sleep again, but I was getting very, very good at staying awake. By the time Thursday rolled around, my nerves were coiled tight enough to snap. I hadn't left the ridge since I turned those machines back with a court order. The trucks were still down there, parked just past the threshold like 2 yellow vultures. Their engines stayed silent, but their presence was loud. I wasn't waiting for them to make another move. It was time I made one of my own. That morning, I went through the dusty drawer where I kept the original contractor schematics from the utility line survey. Most of it was obsolete. Sketches of trench depths, PVC piping diameters, the usual. But there was one diagram that caught my attention again. A lateral pipeline, thin gauge, not pressurized, crossing the southern tip of my parcel down near the Cedar Grove, labeled temporary HOA line, water access, unconfirmed right. I remembered the day the backhoe showed up to dig that. 2 contractors from Pine Grove asked if they could run a temporary bypass through the edge of my land just for the summer. At the time, it had seemed harmless. They offered me a case of Coors Light and a box of donuts for the favor. I didn't sign anything. I didn't agree in writing, but like an idiot, I shrugged and waved them through. Big mistake. I grabbed my keys and took the ATV down the southern path, winding through pine needles and dry brush until I reached the clearing by the cedars. Sure enough, there it was, a meter box, half buried under years of leaf rot. I brushed it clean and popped the cover. Inside was a perfectly intact pressure-regulated main with a flow control valve, marked HOAFEED in faded Sharpie. I followed the plastic line for about 20 yards and found the extension that led across the property line into Pine Grove. A few minutes of inspection told me everything I needed to know. They were still using it, actively. The line was wet. Their water ran through my land. And now they wanted to knock my house down? Nope. Back home, I drafted a legal notice of encroachment. It stated that HOA infrastructure had been installed on my land without written consent, that it constituted trespass and unauthorized use of private property, and that I intended to terminate access within 72 hours unless all hostile actions against my parcel ceased immediately. I had it notarized, copied, and hand-delivered to the HOA Welcome Center again. This time, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "You have 72 hours, I said to the receptionist. "After that, your water gets cut." That got their attention. An hour later, my phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Mallory Phelps." The voice said sharply, "President of Pine Grove Estates HOA. I believe you've made a threat against community utilities." "Not a threat," I said calmly. "A notice. One I'm fully within my rights to issue. You're piping through my land without consent. That ends in 72 hours unless you withdraw your fraudulent demolition order and restore the original boundaries." There was a pause. A cold, brittle pause. "You don't understand the damage you're causing, Mr. Holt. We've spent years building that community. You live on high ground, prime access. The original subdivision documents included that parcel as future shared space. You're in the way of a master plan. If you won't come to the table, we'll have to act." "Funny," I said. "I wasn't invited to that table when you forged the maps." Her tone turned venomous. "We will not be bullied by one bitter old man with a camera and a YouTube lawyer. You're making a mistake you'll regret." "Time will tell," I said. "You've got 71 hours now. Good luck." I hung up. Later that evening, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to before, Jason Bremer, a soft-spoken guy with a junky RV parked near the lower trails, showed up at my gate. He looked nervous. "Hey, Jeremy," he said. "Mind if I talk to you for a second?" I let him in. He hesitated, then said, "Look, man, I don't want to get involved, but I figured you should know. My sister works for the HOA board. Admin stuff. She told me, well, they're planning something. There's talk of hiring private security. Some kind of emergency access enforcement. They're acting like they own your ridge already." I nodded. "Thanks for the warning." She also said, "Mallory's losing it. She went off at the last meeting, screaming about setting an example and calling you a squatter with a fence fetish. People are starting to get nervous. Even the board thinks she's pushing too hard." "Did anyone record it?" Jason looked down. No one's that stupid. They collect phones at the door now." That got my attention. The next day, I launched one of my own drones. I sent it on a slow, low pass toward the Pine Grove clubhouse during their next scheduled meeting. I'd mounted a shotgun mic and set it to record. I got more than I bargained for. The recording caught Mallory mid-speech, pacing in front of her board like a general in war mode. "We cannot back down now," she said. "If we lose this fight, others will start resisting. The house has to go. If we have to bulldoze it in the middle of the night, so be it. The board's vote is final, and I will personally sign the demolition contract if he doesn't comply. Make no mistake, we are taking that land." I saved the footage. Then I smiled, because now, finally, I had something better than permits and survey stakes. I had her voice. Friday morning, I drove straight to the county courthouse with a USB stick in my pocket and an old fire in my gut. The footage of Mallory's rant was clear, her voice crisp and recognizable. A public official effectively calling for vigilante demolition under cover of darkness. That wasn't just arrogance. That was a felony waiting to happen. At the records office, I handed the footage to a clerk I trusted, Sandy. She'd been working there since before most HOA board members had mortgages. I asked her to quietly file the recording under an ongoing property dispute case. She gave me a long look and said, "Jeremy, you're kicking a hornet's nest here." "Good," I said. I brought boots. Before leaving, I filed an emergency complaint with the Office of the County Prosecutor, attaching the footage, my cease and desist, my legal property documents, and a signed affidavit about the waterline encroachment. I also forwarded copies to 2 media contacts Danny had connected me with, both small-time, but eager. By midday, the story had legs. A local news blog ran a short piece. Veteran land surveyor fights HOA attempt to claim legally owned land. It was dry, mostly quoting documents, but the headline caught fire. Within hours, HOA, an advocacy site I'd never heard of, picked it up and blasted it across their feeds with the headline, "Ho threatens to bulldoze veteran's house. He fights back with receipts." The view count jumped into the tens of thousands. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It had parked halfway down the access road behind a thicket of lodgepole pines, not on my land, but close. I only saw it because one of my side-mounted trail cams caught the reflection of sunlight off its windshield. I zoomed in and enhanced the plate. Rental. The same SUV was still there at dusk. I called the sheriff's department. "Unless they're trespassing or threatening you," the deputy said, "we can't do much." They're surveilling my property, I said. And we're not a surveillance state, Mr. Holt. You want us to knock on a legally parked car's window because they made you nervous. I hung up. Classic. That night, I cut off the HOA's water supply. I didn't just close the valve. I capped the line, sealed it shut. Then I took photos of the entire process, before and after, and uploaded the documentation to a secure drive, time-stamped and GPS tagged. The fallout came by morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my motion alerts went haywire. 6 intrusions at once. I pulled up the camera feed and nearly dropped my mug. A work crew, not the one from before, a different one, had arrived at dawn. No logos, no HOA jackets, just plain white trucks and hard hats. They had already set up a barrier at the edge of my property, laying cones and tape like they were prepping a construction site. One of them, probably the foreman, was standing by the fence holding a tablet. He didn't approach, he just pointed. I headed out fast, camera strapped to my chest, legal binder under my arm. As I crossed the ridge trail, one of them finally spoke. "Sir, I'm going to need you to vacate this area. We've been authorized to begin demolition preparation." "By whom?" I asked. "By the Pine Grove Estates Homeowners Association." I held up my binder. "You're on private land. That's criminal trespass. And if you so much as scratch a stone on my foundation, I'll bury you in court filings." He didn't blink. "We were told this land is subject to HOA regulation." I opened to the map. That's funny, because according to the official cadastral record, this land was zoned residential rural, free of encumbrance, 5 years before Pine Grove even existed. He stared. Then I opened the second page. "And here's a signed court order, issued last week, prohibiting all demolition activity on this parcel until the dispute is resolved. Violation carries a penalty of contempt. You can call the sheriff. I already did." Silence. He looked at his crew. "Pack it up." The trucks were gone in 15 minutes. That evening, I got a visit from Danny again. She'd come back with a new cameraman and a pair of mic'd body cams. Said the station wanted more on-site footage. We sat on the porch and reviewed the HOA's latest actions, piece by piece. "Can I use the audio you recorded of Mallory?" she asked. "Absolutely." "And the utility cut?" "Got the whole thing documented. They'll have a hard time pretending they didn't know." She smiled. "This is starting to feel bigger than just a land grab." "Oh, it is." Because by then, I had something even better than the footage. I had started digging into the digital records of the revised maps submitted by the HOA, and something didn't add up. The GIS overlay didn't match the original benchmark coordinates. There were anomalies, missing metadata, improperly aligned control points, signatures from individuals who weren't even authorized state surveyors. I'd seen this before, back when I was working for the BLM. They had faked the map, badly. I wasn't just fighting to save my home anymore. I was about to expose a criminal conspiracy. By Saturday morning, I was no longer just some cranky old man on a hill. The emails started early. Former surveyors, retired lawyers, even one guy from the Colorado State Mapping Authority who'd seen the news blog and offered to review my case for free. Word had gotten out. The kicker? One of those emails included a link to an archived planning board transcript from 3 years ago, a meeting I hadn't known existed. In it, Mallory Phelps and a representative from Blue Mountain Developments discussed a long-term integration strategy for expanding Pine Grove. They mentioned my parcel by name, Lot 71, as under consideration for future conversion. My land, my name. Years before any of this nonsense started, that was the smoking gun I needed. I printed the transcript, annotated the timeline, and sent everything to my lawyer. Yes, I had one now. A bulldog named Grant Ellison, ex-military JAG Corps, now specializing in land disputes. He'd been watching my case since the footage dropped and agreed to take it pro bono until the state picked up interest. "You're looking at a textbook case of fraudulent encroachment," he said over the phone. "If they forged state maps, this isn't just a civil matter anymore, it's criminal." And criminal meant heat. Fast. That same day, I received a formal letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from a law firm representing them. It was a cease and desist, claiming I had interfered with utility infrastructure, made defamatory statements, and jeopardized the health and safety of Pine Grove residents. I laughed out loud. They accused me of jeopardizing safety. After threatening to bulldoze my house, I forwarded the letter to Grant. "Perfect," he said. "This is admission of engagement. They just acknowledged the water line exists on your land. Makes proving trespass even easier." By Sunday, the story had jumped to regional news. A reporter from Channel 12 drove up in a dust-covered Jeep and asked if she could film a walkthrough of the property. I agreed, on one condition, that she include aerial overlays of the real versus forged property lines. She agreed. I emailed her the visual comparison file, and by that evening, the segment aired. Land battle in Pine Grove. Is this man being targeted by a rogue HOA? It was glorious. They aired the clip of Mallory's rant, blurred the faces of the HOA board, and included commentary from a zoning expert who outright stated, if this recording is legitimate, that HOA president just confessed to conspiracy. Things started moving. Fast after that, on Monday morning, 2 state auditors from the Department of Regulatory Agencies showed up unannounced at the HOA office. I didn't know they were coming until a neighbor texted me, "Dude, 2 guys in suits just walked in and everyone froze." Mallory looked like she was going to vomit. I watched from the ridge through binoculars as the auditors walked out 2 hours later with a thick stack of files. One of them glanced up at my camera pole, gave a slight nod, and drove off. Later that day, Grant called me again. "You sitting down?" he said. "Sure. State prosecutor's office just opened an inquiry. They're treating this as a coordinated attempt to defraud the county via illicit rezoning. They're freezing all new permit activity related to Pine Grove effective immediately." I let that sink in. It meant they couldn't build, couldn't expand, couldn't sell. Their entire scheme dead in the water. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sun turn the valley gold. For the first time in weeks, the machines were gone. No bulldozers, no SUVs, no strangers taking photos from the trees. But the fight wasn't over. Because I still hadn't seen the original forged map submission, the one they filed to the county with my parcel mysteriously included. And if I could find that, the document itself, I could prove not just intent, but names. Tuesday morning started with a knock at the door. Not aggressive, not hostile, but the kind that makes your spine straighten. When I opened it, I saw a man in a forest green windbreaker, clipboard in hand, and a badge from the Colorado Office of Land Integrity. His name was Agent Reynolds, and he had a calm, tired face like someone who'd spent 20 years dragging bureaucrats into courtrooms. "Mr. Holt," he said, "we'd like your help identifying discrepancies in a series of land use filings." I invited him in and brewed a second pot of coffee. Over the next 2 hours, we sat at my kitchen table going through every single document I had. GPS logs, drone overlays, survey markers, timestamps. Reynolds never once interrupted. He took photos, scanned files, and jotted down notes with a surgeon's precision. When we finished, he looked up and said, "You're not paranoid, Mr. Holt. You're just better prepared than most." He promised to follow up and left with a USB drive full of damning evidence. I locked the door behind him and sat in silence. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because all that evidence still needed the linchpin, the forged map itself. Then, around noon, it found me. I got an anonymous email. No subject line. Just a Google Drive link and one sentence. She made us redraw the lines. Thought you'd want to see the drafts before they disappear. Inside were 4 PDFs. Each was a version of the plat map from different months. The earlier ones clearly excluded my property. But the latest? It showed my parcel, Lot 71, neatly boxed inside HOA jurisdiction. The coordinates had been nudged, the margins smoothed. But there was a flaw. The geodetic signature block at the bottom was a copy-paste, identical to the one on the January version, down to the pixel distortion. That alone was enough to suggest forgery. I compared the documents side by side, then called Grant. "I've got it," I said. "The actual chain of edits. All of it." He whistled. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He told me to send it to him immediately and to back it up in 3 different places. I did. Then I sent one copy to Agent Reynolds and another to Danny from Channel 12. By Wednesday morning, it was everywhere. The news ran the segment under a new headline. HOA land swap scandal, local homeowner uncovers map fraud conspiracy. Now it wasn't just my story. The footage of the overlapping maps made it to national news. A zoning analyst from UCLA was brought on to discuss the rising trend of illicit HOA annexation, and for the first time, they showed Mallory's name and face in full clarity, no more blurring. By noon, HOA board members began resigning. I watched a white SUV pull out from the HOA clubhouse lot and not come back. My trail cam later captured someone removing HOA signage from the entrance gate, but the real blow came Thursday morning. A county marshal, flanked by 2 deputies, arrived at Mallory Phelps's home and escorted her to an unmarked sedan. She didn't resist. She looked smaller, like a balloon that had slowly deflated from the inside. Official charges were filed that afternoon: fraudulent filing of public records, falsification of geodetic data, conspiracy to defraud, and abuse of administrative authority. The story exploded. News vans parked near the bottom of my trail. Reporters called me nonstop. HOA reform groups began citing my case as precedent. I didn't answer most of them. Instead, I went down to the ridge and took a long walk across the border of my land. The sun was setting. The wind had that sharp, clean edge it gets just before snowfall, and in the clearing where the old water line had been, I planted a sign I'd made the night before. Private property, not affiliated with any HOA. All maps subject to public review. For once, no one was there to argue. The hearing was held 3 weeks later in the Mesa County District Courthouse, a squat beige building that smelled like old paper and tired hope. I sat in the 3rd row, tie slightly crooked, hands folded, watching as the judge read out the charges against Mallory Phelps with the calm cadence of a man accustomed to arrogance imploding. She stood there in a stiff gray suit, flanked by her attorneys, jaw tight, eyes blank. No more dramatic threats, no more condescending smirks, just the slow-motion collapse of a woman who had bet everything on nobody pushing back. The prosecution laid it all out: the falsified GIS overlays, the reused digital signature blocks, the forged notary stamps, the internal HOA emails where she directed others to fold Parcel 71 into the new schematic silently. They even brought in one of the contractors, the same guy who stood on my ridge with the demolition team. He testified under immunity, admitted he'd been told the land was legally acquired, but something always felt off. Grant was there too. He didn't speak during the hearing. He didn't need to. His documents, his casework, my footage, it was enough to bury them. The judge declared the revised plat maps null and void, the HOA's claim to my property legally non-existent, and the attempted enforcement of demolition a violation of civil protections under Colorado land use statutes. In simpler terms, I won. Unequivocally, publicly, but it didn't stop there. The court ordered a full dissolution of Pine Grove Estates HOA. Not a suspension, not a reorganization, a complete shutdown. Why? Because the fraud wasn't limited to me. Apparently, several other parcels had been gently absorbed into HOA jurisdiction in recent years, always on the outskirts, always without the owner's full knowledge. I'd been the first to fight back hard enough to expose it. The judge appointed a temporary land trustee, a former state zoning officer, to oversee the community until all impacted deeds could be corrected. Residents were given 60 days to form a voluntary association, not an HOA, under state observation or dissolve entirely into standard county jurisdiction. As for Mallory, she took a plea deal: 18 months of house arrest, 5 years of probation, a massive fine, and a lifetime ban from serving on any administrative board in the state of Colorado. I heard she sold her house and moved out of state. No one came to her defense. I didn't throw a party. I didn't give interviews. I didn't write a memoir. I just went home. Grant helped me file for damages and the court granted it. $912,000, accounting for legal fees, property devaluation, emotional distress, and the cost of hiring private security during the conflict. I took a chunk of that and reinforced my boundary markers with laser-stamped coordinates just for the symbolism. I also installed a motion-sensitive signpost that lights up if anyone gets within 20 feet of the property line. It flashes once, then says, "Wrong parcel. Try again." I still live in the same house, same stone foundation, same ridge view over the valley. But now the mailbox says something new. Holt Jeremy, independent landholder not subject to any association. Maps verified. Good luck trying. Sometimes hikers pass through the edge of the woods and stop to look at the house. A few take pictures. A couple knock, ask questions. I give them lemonade and tell them the short version, that the world isn't run by monsters, just people who think they'll never get caught. And sometimes, they don't need a map to find the truth.